Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our evening public comment session for August 18th, 2020 of the Lane County Board of County Commissioners. Our first item up is public comment. But before I do so, I just want to give a little bit of information to whoever is listening and interested in public comment. So to the public that is watching the meeting, when you register to watch the meeting, you are registered in our system as attendees. Attendees are webinar participants who are simply viewers of the meeting, an audience member. Your microphone and your webcam are automatically muted as attendees. However, there will be a time in the meeting where we'll open it up for public comment. And at that time, if you wish to do public comment, I'll ask you to raise your virtual hand. And that time would be now if you are interested. You should see a hand icon on your device. Simply hit that hand icon once. When public comment begins, our meeting moderator will call the names. And when your name is called, you'll be unmuted and given 3 minutes for public comment. When your 3 minutes is up, you'll go back into muted status and the next name will be called. You can then continue to watch the webinar as long as you'd like. We will try to give everyone who wishes to present public comment an opportunity to speak, but please note in the event that there are more people wishing to speak than a time allots, we may need to limit the number of speakers or reduce the amount of time per speaker. Speakers are then selected randomly to participate. This evening's public comment session is specifically to hear you, our community members. We haven't had to modify any of our 3-minute time allotments so far, and hopefully we won't have to do that again today. This time, I'll send it over to our moderator to start us up.
Thank you, Chair Buck. Good evening, everyone. At this time, the Board of Commissioners will hear general public comment. There's 2 items on this agenda. One is general public comment, and the other is an equity and access listening session. So if you registered for this meeting to just give general public comment, please raise your hand now, and I will call on you. There will be an opportunity in a few minutes when the listening session begins for more people to give testimony on the equity and access item. I do see 2 hands up right now for general public comment. I see someone, Eric C. I will call on you first, and then Sandra Erickson, you will be next. I'm going to looks like Eric put his hand down. So Sandra Erickson, I'm going to call on you. I will unmute you and start your timer, and you may begin your public comment. It looks like you're self-muted, Sandra. Sandra, I've unmuted you, but it looks like you have your device on mute. If you would like to unmute, you can begin your public testimony.
How about that? Can you hear me?
Much better. There you go. Yes, we can.
Okay.
Thank you.
What I would like to talk about is education. Today, how to care for people now dominates the national discussion. Social problems have become more than all government jurisdictions, urban or rural, can handle on their own or on an ongoing basis. It's time to think about prevention instead of concentrating solely on treatment or fixes after the problem has presented itself. At the same time, the health, financial, housing, consumer protection, and legal systems in the US have become more incomprehensible and complex than ever for the average person. Solving social recurring problems means that local government and educational boards must meet jointly to plan a prevention program for Lane County. They need to arm each person with the education they need to care for themselves and their families, jointly funded. It is technical, scientific, and financial knowledge. It is called human ecology. and it includes adaptation to climate change. If the cognitive empowerment of each person was prioritized, the rewards would include vastly lower social costs, fewer people committing crimes, fewer seeking redress in the courts, less food programs needed by schools, fewer ER visits, less sickness in addition due to depression and poor mental health, better childcare, and less poverty. Its absence in the schools is evident by the growing rates of generational and situational poverty, poor aspects for children, poor health, like the responses to the pandemic, for instance, and more consumer fraud. Lane will be one of the first counties in the United States to tackle social problems at the source, the mind. It's never going to work to keep treating them after people have made all the poor decisions and made all the mistakes. They must be taught differently and better. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. At this time, I do not see any other hands raised for general public comment. I will ask one last time if there's anyone else who would like to speak during the general public comment period. If so, please raise your virtual hand. I do not see any more hands going up, so I will turn the meeting back over to you, Chair Buck.
Very good, thank you. We will move on to Commissioner's response and remonstrance. Any comments from any commissioners? I'll just start out by saying I have seen your comments and emails come through. So I believe it's Sandra that spoke, and I do agree preventive measures are a huge step in the right direction, and a lot of it does revolve around education. The county board doesn't have a huge relationship jurisdictional over education, but we do talk to those folks quite a bit. And I know that you've been working very hard on this particular subject, and I appreciate your advocacy. Commissioner Bernie.
Ms. Erickson, everything you said is music to my ears. Thank you so much. I would like to start by sharing a quote I know you know from Frederick Douglass. It is easier to build strong children than repair broken adults. I think I'm just going to say a few words because you're allowing me to through your comments. But I think that many of the comments I said are consistent with that earlier when we were looking at racial inequities in our juvenile justice program. I think that you can look at almost any arena of life and identify how prevention is cheaper than the cure. Even in the county's homeless work right now, the county and the city in partnership with the city of Eugene, we are only using the HUD definition of homelessness, and yet there are other federal definitions that talk about children. And I am advocating that we incorporate all of those because I couldn't agree with you more, and I thank you for your testimony.
Any other response or remonstrance? Okay, we will move on to the next segment of our evening public comment period, which is our equity and access listening session. So for this item, I am going to turn it over to Mo Young, our equity and access coordinator, to start us off.
Thank you, Chair Buck. Hello and good evening, and thank you to everyone who is here. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to come and share your thoughts and feelings about racial equity in Lane County and to help us define a truly equitable community. We know this isn't an ideal format to have this conversation, and we're trying to not let technology be a barrier, but bear with us, we're all still learning. It's important that we do it in this fashion to keep people healthy and safe. And we also know that our equity work can't wait. I'm going to take just a couple of minutes to introduce myself and the folks that I've been working with, and to give the commissioners a chance to introduce themselves in our format if they would like. We're going to say our names, our pronouns, our racial identity, and then explain our role in the racial equity work at Lane County. So my name is Mo Young. My pronouns are she, her, hers. My racial identity is that I am a biracial Black woman, and I am the Equity and Access Coordinator here at the county, and so I get to have my hands in all of the racial equity work, which I'm super excited about. I'm going to hand it off to Judy.
Hi, my name is Judy Williams, and I am a Strategy and Integration Manager here at Lane County in County Administration. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I identify as a Latina. And I've been part of the equity work that we've been doing here at Lane County for several years, and in particular working on the racial equity work with a dedicated kind of cohort group with several individuals for more intensely over the last year and a half. And I am going to take myself off the webcam as I'm going to be doing some behind the scenes activities. So I will join you later. Thanks.
And Alana.
Hi, good evening. My name is Alana Holmes. I'm the Chief Human Resources Officer here at Lane County. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I identify as Mexican American. I am part of the Racial Equity Core Team, as well as the Government Alliance on Race and Equity cohort. You heard Judy mention Judy and I have been part of that cohort and continue to do equity work in our organization. And tonight my role will be to moderate the question panel. So for those of you that choose to type out questions in the question box, that I will be taking those as time permits through the evening. Thank you.
Commissioners, did you want to, I'm putting you kind of on the spot, so it's okay to say no thank you. We'll talk later.
I will join you. My name is Heather Buck, Chair of the Lane County Board of Commissioners. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. As County Commissioner, our duty is to set policy for the county, and I am white.
Thank you. All right. So we're going to start with just a brief overview, and then we're going to hand it over to the community for the listening session. If you have questions about this presentation or about Lane County's racial equity work, you can post in the question box, and we'll do our best to find answers tonight. And we'll also create an FAQ document that will be, you can find it on the website. So we want to start with some background about why we're holding these listening sessions. After the murder of George Floyd on May 25th, the Lane County Equity and Access Advisory Board drafted a resolution acknowledging the work that Lane County must do in order to achieve racial equity, and that resolution was passed unanimously by the Board of County Commissioners on June 9th. Part of this resolution included hearing from and working with community to help realize this vision. The next step is for our racial equity core team to host these listening sessions. This is the second of 8. We acknowledge that this is just the first step in a long journey, and we're eager to hear your thoughts, questions, concerns, and anything else you'd like to share to guide us in defining what success looks like as we look to shape our future. We hear a lot about racial inequities, but we think that it's really important to think about what we aspire to, which is racial equity, where we would eliminate racial inequities and increase success for everyone. Achieving racial equity requires us to target strategies that focus improvements for those worse off and move beyond services, and focus on changing policies, institutions, and structures. Often, when people are working to close the gaps, they think in terms of treating symptoms and not causes, and as a result, end up talking about programs and services. And while programs and services are critically important, they will never be sufficient to achieve true racial equity. We want to give a brief, and I know that's maybe kind of hard, but we're going to do our best, overview of how critical race theory informs our work, this work at Lane County. It's important to understand that racism is part of the very fabric of our systems and structures in our country. This is about power, where power sits, who has it and who doesn't, and the impacts of those differences. In acknowledging that these differences persist, we can begin to raise our awareness and change course for the future. Critical race theory has 6 major components. We'll give a very high-level overview at the risk of being a little academic, but we think this is a powerful lens for this work, and so we wanted to share it. This is how we are thinking about this work. So the first component is that racism is ordinary and normal. It's important to understand that racism is part of the very fabric of our systems and structures in this country, and has affected the lived experience of people of color, including who has access to what resources, where one might live, what education a child might receive, and even how long one might live. Race is socially constructed. Equally important to note is that racial categories are an entirely made up, socially constructed phenomenon designed by white folks in order to more easily oppress those who they deemed inferior. While there is no biological difference between races, the effects of race are very real. The next is interest convergence. These systems will only change when the interests of the powerful align with those of the marginalized. Otherwise, white culture has little incentive to confront racism because it ultimately benefits from it and has for centuries. As we keep going clockwise, we come to racial categories are not easily defined and singular. Since race is socially constructed, we are all made up of many identities. Everyone has potentially conflicting, overlapping identities, loyalties, and allegiances that make up who they are and shape their perspective. For example, a white woman is powerful in her race, but part of the oppressed in her gender. Color blindness does not level the playing field. Ignoring or denying the differences does not actually level the playing field or create equity. In fact, the power lies in acknowledging that people have different experiences and are treated differently based on the color of their skin, and it is critical that we work to see the ways in which this occurs. Counter stories need unique voices of color. So how do we begin to see? How do we build awareness and begin to repair the broken systems? We must create space to hear the unique voices of color willing to share their experiences. Often these stories run counter to the popular community narrative about how things work or why things are the way they are. We must believe that minority status accounts are accurate and those with lived experiences are competent to speak about race and racism. It's the job of those in the dominant culture to listen and validate those brave enough to share these counter stories that are often silenced by the dominant culture. And this is where you come in. This process is a little bit more formal because we're limited to a virtual environment, but here's the structure that we set up to try to be sure that everyone who wants to share has a chance to be heard. In order to hear from as many people as possible, we will use a timer to be able to share the space. Once everyone has a chance to speak, if there's time and interest for a second round, we will do that. If you wish to speak during the listening session portion of the meeting, there will be an option to virtually raise your hand. We saw how that works earlier. When it's your turn to speak, the meeting organizer, Judy, tonight, will announce your name, unmute you, and you will be given 3 minutes to make your comment. Speakers will be selected randomly. The purpose tonight is to listen, and so in general, panelists and facilitators will not be answering or discussing things brought up by the attendees. Instead, we will take notes and refer issues for follow-up with the proper staff afterwards. If there's time after everyone has had a chance to speak, there may be an opportunity for discussion and reflections. Themes from the sessions, from all of the sessions, will be compiled along with the notes and presented to the Board of County Commissioners at the October 6th meeting. And as you're preparing to share your ideas about the ways in which our communities can define success, we would like to offer just a gentle reminder that space should be made for the voices of Black, Indigenous, people of color. If you are not someone who identifies as a person of color, please consider waiting to raise your hand and allow others to go first in sharing their thoughts and stories tonight. So the next slide In order to frame our discussion and our path forward, we're asking some real specific questions, and you'll see those on your screen. They'll be up on the screen for the remainder of the meeting. And for folks who just called in and don't have a screen, I'll read them. It's what actionable things could or should Lane County do in order to ensure that racial equity is achieved? How will you know that we got it right? And how should we define success? We're hoping that through these listening sessions, the answers to these questions will become more clear and help us guide us on this long journey that we believe starts by listening. So I'm going to hand it off to Judy and to all of you to share your thoughts.
Thank you, Mo. So as Mo mentioned and Chair Buck earlier, we're going to ask that at this time that you raise your virtual hand if you're interested in speaking. And if you're curious, it looks like a hand signal. It comes in different formats based on how you're logging in, but it's a simple hand icon that you're going to see. It is a toggle switch, so if you hit it more than one time, you might hit it on and off. So at this time, I'm asking if you can raise your virtual hand, and we'll see how many we have in order to make sure we have enough time for everybody. So at this time, I think we're good with going with a 3-minute timer. We also have, and I just to emphasize as well, that we do have a question box. If you're considering what question you might have, or if you're more comfortable putting that in the question box, Alana will be tracking that, and we'll make sure that we incorporate that into our dialogue tonight. So I see that a couple of people had their hand raised, and then it was not, it was turned off. So again, at this time, if you're interested in speaking, if you could raise your virtual hand. I don't see. I don't have anyone with their hands raised at this time. And I see, so maybe Alana, did you have any questions in the question box?
Hi, Judy. At this time, actually, there are no questions showing on my screen in the question box either.
I'll do one more chance as I see Aisha McCoy. Your hand's been off and on. I just wanted to know if you're having any technical difficulties, let us know, or you can type in a question in the question box. Just want to make sure that we're attentive to if you're trying to comment. Okay, at this time I see Brenda Gilmer. So I'm gonna unmute you and I will start the timer. And it looks like you are self-muted. Okay, it looks like you're ready to go. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay, perfect. I will go ahead and start the timer. Thank you.
One of the first question, what actionable things could or should Lane County do in order to ensure that racial equity is achieved? I have a lot of things to address to that, but I am on the Lane County Equity and Access Advisory Board, and I'm not speaking for them, I'm speaking for me personally, with what I personally think would help here in a place like Florence, Oregon, a rural away from Springfield and Eugene. I think that you need to clarify the rights that people are entitled to, express them with different words, so it becomes clear that what the duty is, who it's owed to, and how a person in government is responsible for seeing that they're honoring it, that this is an honest commitment and they agree. They agree with it. They agree they will not discriminate based on race. They agree that they will not discriminate based on sex. They agree that they will respect the marriages of same-sex couples. They will agree that people who aren't white heterosexual couples are free from constant attack, that their dignity be respected. And I think that that's something that could be expressed in words, and I just don't see that it really is. It certainly doesn't become encompassed with an oath of office to agree not to discriminate or agree to support the Constitution. Thank you.
Thank you for your time and your comment. Anybody else that would like to raise their hand and speak? Otherwise, if you're thinking about it, there is possibly a question in the question box. So I will turn it over to Alana.
All right, Judy, thanks. Actually, there was a statement. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing the last name. Jeffrey Dean, Dehne. He had a comment. Thank you for doing this and being inclusive. I have to leave at this time for a Grange meeting. Keep up the good work. Education is the key. That's his comment for the evening. That's all I have at this time, Judy.
Thank you, Alana.
Oh, actually, unless you have a raised hand, I do have one more that just popped up.
All right, go ahead. I do not see any other hands raised.
All right, this is from Carol Taylor. The question is, can Lane County teach racial equality in the schools by enhancing social studies and history? Is it a goal Lane County wants to achieve? If the answers are yes, how soon can the schools start? If the answer is no, why? Thank you, Carol. All right, Judy, back to you.
Thanks, Alana. One more time, if anybody is interested in speaking, if you could raise your virtual hand at this time. Okay, I do see Shay Gallagher Star. I have unmuted you. If you would like to, it looks like you're unmuted. Can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, I wouldn't take up a lot of time with this necessarily, but since there seem to be so few of us this evening, I've seen some recent discussion on social media about the possibility of renaming Lane County, that there's a racist history in the name that was chosen, and some discussion about approaching the displaced people of this region, the Kalpuya, to discuss whether they would like to rename our county. I just wanted to bring that up and ask the commissioners whether they're aware of these conversations and kind of what the stance of the commission is, and whether there's been any conversation with the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde or Confederated Tribes of the Silettes regarding this possibility. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much for your time and your comment. At this time, I'm going to call, we do have a couple others. Michelle Thurston. I have unmuted you. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you.
Good evening. I did have one kind of little statement I'd like to say. I'd really like there to be more public access to the definition between equity and equality. I think that those two things are commonly misunderstood, and interchanged without any thought to the difference between those two definitions. So I think education in the difference between equality and equity would be a nice place to start. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else that would like to provide public comment and would like to raise your hand? Otherwise, I might turn it back over to you, Alana. I think there's some other questions that came in.
Thank you. I do have one. So this is from Crystal Bryan, and I'll read the question/comment. I actually started the petition to change the county name. Some students at the U of O are working to outline a plan to present to the tribes and commissioners. Here on the Mackenzie River, we are working to elevate and support diverse voices in our rural communities and connect them to the resources they need for their efforts. Is there a possibility for a toolkit that this team from the county could provide specifically for those of us in rural areas? Just throwing that out there. Thank you, Crystal. Appreciate your comment and question. And Judy, that's all I have at this time.
Thank you, Alana. I don't have any others, so if I would turn it back over to you, Mo. You would like?
Okay. I'm gonna find my notes from the last time. I'd like to just share a couple of things that came out. You'd think it would be just open, but it's not. Sorry.
I can chime in while you're looking for that if you wanted to just walk through a couple of the themes that were mentioned at our last listening session. And again, the listening session, we've had one so far. This is our second one, and we so appreciate your time and coming out and participating and being here. We heard several themes last session, and I would say a majority somewhat were centered around mental illness or mental health and just trying to be thoughtful about the intersection between so many topics, from housing to public safety to mental health. Those themes kept coming up over and over. Really being clear on gathering as much data as we could. That was a big theme that came up that I remember. And data, not just quantitative data, but also the qualitative piece and hearing those stories, having those conversations, and making the space to have maybe an expanded beyond the listening session into more of a conversation. But really great thoughts and comments last time. It was a really good conversation too, as good as we can in this virtual environment. So many good things that, as well as what we heard tonight, that we can work towards next steps. So Mo, did you want to?
Yeah, I just want to add a couple others. So the last session last Thursday was focused on mental health, racial equity and mental health. And so one thing that I heard a couple of times is it's really hard being a person of color in this community. It's really hard finding a mental health provider that understands the difficulties that we face, and to be able to just go get services without providing education around that. And so we heard loud and clear from many, many people that we need to really diversify the pool of available mental health professionals in this area, so that folks who have, really different experiences can have access to those providers. And then we heard a lot, and I think it was a couple of people that talked a few times, but we heard a lot of conversation about mental health in the jail. And so I think, there's we can always make things better. And I think there's also some education that needs to happen about what's going on there. And then there were some cool ideas that came out that, you know, they're at this point, they're just ideas, but one of the ones that the folks from NAMI brought up was, you know, creating groups so that folks who are just discovering their own racial self-awareness can do that in the safety of like a affinity group with professionals, so that they're not just, you know, causing harm out in the world. And then I guess the last thing that I'll share is just that we heard from a number of people that, you know, we really have to look at retention, and that's a community-wide issue. So when people of color come here for jobs and they bring their families here, what are we as the broader community doing to ensure that you know, they're getting plugged into community and that they want to stay? Well, I don't see any more questions or hands.
I don't have any, Mo.
Okay. So I think we're going to hand it back to you, commissioners.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you to everybody who had comments, either written or were able to speak. I'll ask commissioners if they have any comments or response. Commissioner Burney?
Thank you. I didn't know I'd have an opportunity to speak. By the way, I list myself as other. One, I recommend you read a book that was written a long time ago by several people, including a guy that was a professor at the University of Oregon in the 60s. His name was Art Pearl. It's called Mental Health of the Poor, New Treatment Approaches. It was a social change-oriented document written by someone that understands clinical psychology backwards and forwards. Highly recommend it. Number two, I think that we really have to rally the troops better. We really have to make, I believe, my opinion, that we know when we see success when there are good jobs for everyone, jobs that give people a sense of usefulness, of meaning, of purpose, allow them to have decent housing for everyone, good schools for all of our children. I think we really can, I'm just giving you my opinion, but I really think we can lay out what success looks like, and we can start taking tangible steps to get from here to there. And I look forward to your listening sessions, having more and more and more and more people provide input, and I look forward to seeing what that is. Thank you, Mo.
Commissioner Sorensen?
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes,
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Oh, good. Well, first of all, I want to thank Ms. Williams and Ms. Young and others involved in putting together this program this evening. And I think it is very worthwhile for the Board of Commissioners to engage in these listening sessions. And like Commissioner Burney, I was waiting and wanted to listen and have listened. And I do appreciate all of the comments that were made this evening. I think it's fair to say that all of us come in to any discussion with our own set of backgrounds and education and cultural awareness. And I'm certainly no different. And I'm not sure I go all the way to say I identify with all other, but certainly I have a background as a person raised in a rural Oregon setting in a very white community, although not entirely white. but a very white community. I'm white, I'm male, I'm heterosexual, and these are important components of who I am. But I'm also aware that there are many distinctions, and I think the presentation reviewed that many of us are in different categories, all kinds of different categories. I'm not entirely sure I entirely am comfortable with lumping myself in with all other white people when I really don't have the experiences of all other white people. I've got a very narrow, 3 of my 4 grandparents were born in Denmark, so that puts me in a fairly narrow category of the smallest of the Scandinavian countries. So at any rate, I feel it's really important that we listen, and I'm not sure that I have received a lot of input tonight or a lot of perspective, but I certainly think we ought to keep going with this idea of listening, because part of the racial problems of the United States is the failure of people to listen. So I'm all in favor of the surveys, listening and asking questions, and also for purposes of our government, of our Lane County government, in our board's decision not to have an advisory committee, but to have the county administrator have a group that advises him on matters of equity and inclusion, racial diversity, et cetera. I certainly hope that we get reports from this group, from the group that reports to the county administrator at least, and make sure that they have the opportunity to recommend things within their power. And I'm quite interested in what was brought up earlier today by the comments of Commissioner Farr, namely, well, what's going on in the sheriff's office in terms of the purchase of equipment, the purchase of excess military equipment. Are we buying a lot of that? Are we being given that? Is it being used? Is that something we're doing to protect our citizens, or is that something that we as a board need to be clear that these are acquired for defensive purposes and for purposes of law enforcement, not for suppression of the people of Lane County? So I'm interested in all these things. I'm extremely interested in the equity side of this whole thing. Namely, we've got a lot of poor people in Lane County. I gather over 70,000 people are on federal food assistance. That's pretty significant. We need to be looking out for all those folks. It's a pretty big minority, maybe as high as 1/5 of the county. Who knows? Maybe it's higher during the COVID time. So those are concerns I have. And thank you so much for all those who did present tonight.
Any other comments from board members? Commissioner Bosevich?
Thank you. So I'm probably going to run a little bit counter to some of what's been expressed and say a couple things that may be controversial. I am a strong believer in Dr. King's words about not judging people by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And I'm a huge believer in the individual rights and the potential of individuals. Believing that, I don't think I would do anything that would marginalize the potential of a large portion of our population through some kind of, institutional or unknown reason, because I believe everybody's got that potential. And I really don't accept the concept of race outside of human race. It's a human construct to try and divide us any further than that. And if as you heard people identify themselves, quite often it was more about ethnicity and origin, not any sort of skin color or which is purely a genetic piece of our makeup and when you get down to the genetic DNA level, there's almost no difference between all human beings on this planet. We're all part of the human race. And the sooner we stop accepting that there is subcategories of humans, the sooner we can stop talking about some of these issues. And I truly believe in that. And I think there's been a change to try and as part of this theory, to go back away from what Dr. King was pushing for, which was a colorblind society, where we accept people as individuals and their potential as individuals. So I would, I appreciate it. I know I don't have those experiences. I expressed my support for the resolution because I was expressing what I know from my experience of the individuals I know that are of color, but not a different race, and some of the prejudices they've experienced. And I just hope that folks can appreciate, that here we are, us quote unquote white board members all have very, very vastly different experiences, vastly different backgrounds. I am a pure mutt, even if my name is Slavic. That's only 1/4 of my heritage. I even have some American Indian back on my father's side, Native American, and it's just difficult to try and assign, perspective and everything purely by looking at a person. And the sooner we stop doing that, I think the better off our society will be. And judging people from the content of their character and understanding that every individual has enormous potential to benefit everyone else in the society. And anytime we can break down a barrier that prevents the marginalization of individuals of achieving their full potential is a good thing. And that's really what I support in this effort, is breaking down those barriers for individuals to realize their potential.
Any other comments from commissioners? I'll add that I appreciate everybody who is taking time this evening to come and comment, either in the chat or speaking. I mentioned that earlier, and I want these public evening comment sessions and listening sessions for our equity and access folks to be successful. So I want us really, I think the true meaning of a listening session is to listen and not necessarily provide judgment. These are lived experiences from people in our community, and we honor that. As a white woman, I don't have the same experiences as women of color, clearly. I want to know what those are, and I want to find a way to be an ally, to be as involved in making things as fair and equitable for all people in our entire community, state, and nation. The only comparable that I can find sometimes for the particular subject of color blindness versus seeing people's color is from a gender point of view. There are many times when there's language that's used that is assigned a male gender. And for example, I think my board members, fellow board members already know this, but I dislike the words "you guys" because it doesn't see me as a woman, as an individual that's present. And it can be used generically for many things, but for me, it's offensive. And I know that from a racial point of view, there's many, many instances where that is a regular issue, in addition to all the other racial inequities that we find in our community that are brought to light during these listening sessions. I look forward to hearing the report that comes back after we have our listening sessions with the rest of the community. It'll be a little bit before they come back and they're compiled. But that's the kind of thing that I want to hear, how it impacts people of color in our community and how we can change that, amongst, I'm sure, other subjects like the mental health that you mentioned before, and whatever comes our way. Commissioner Burney, did I see your hand up?
Yeah, I'm mixed. I think we've already had more airtime from commissioners than we have from people who are providing input, and that's too bad, but that's just the way it is. This is going to be one of those rare moments where I want to say two things. The chair knows I absolutely respect her. I love her. My wife loves the term "you guys." So everyone has different experiences and different connotations. I'm looking forward to these listening sessions, but we have to understand something. And unless you have had lived experience, and I want to suggest maybe I have, listening to people's stories is racial understanding light. It is never going to be the same as walking in people's shoes, and we're going to want to make it as close as we can. To the degree that anyone is interested, I would love to share stories about each and every one of my mentors of color, which include Pearl Hill, Sylvia Hill, John Nisby, Kelly Kitagawa, Ben Johnson, who I had the opportunity to introduce Motu, Mario Velasquez, Roberto Rubalcava. The list goes on. I mean, really, truly, I've got a list of about 40 names. Stories, experiences with them, and that's how that happens. Now, this is maybe fourth best, and we really need to hear from others. So I'm done pontificating, but I can't wait to have the listening session. I'm sure, Mo, you and others originally were hoping we would have to. Thank you.
Any other comments from commissioners? Commissioner Sorensen.
I was wondering, since we have Ms. Holmes and Ms. Williamson and Ms. Young, who all introduced themselves, I was wondering if you guys could, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about your own experience, because I agree with Commissioner Burney that the experiences of the commissioners are useful, and we all have our individual stories, and I think that they are useful, but we don't often hear when staff introduce themselves. We don't really hear your story. So I was just curious whether you'd be willing to share some of your own stories.
I'm happy to share. I'm not really sure what I'm going to share, but I'm going to pull up my slide. I just recycled it with the questions. So I grew up here. Commissioner Sorensen, I've known you since forever. You know my parents. And my dad is from the East Coast. He is a Black man from Philadelphia. My mom is a white woman from Kaiser, from just right outside Salem. You know, I was raised in this town with, you know, my mom and my dad and my brother, and there weren't a lot of people of color in my peer group. There were certainly elders in the community that, you know, served sort of as aunties and uncles, because my biological aunts and uncles lived back east. The Black folks lived back east. And I share one of those people with Commissioner Burney. You know, we go back a long time with one of the folks that served as a mentor and an uncle in my life. And this is a weird place to be a person of color. This is a place where, you know, folks don't like to talk about race, and where folks don't like to acknowledge that, you know, we have different experiences, whether that's in school or at the store or, you know, dating or, you know, whatever it is. And that makes it really hard to address things. And so, you know, one of our goals with this listening session is that, you know, we're asking folks to really take a leap of faith with local government to tell us, what should we do, right? We understand that your experience is different. We understand that people that you love, if you're a white person, people that you love and care about, their experiences are different. And so what do we do to fix that, right? And so I think I brought it up earlier as a theme, but I truly believe, you know, figuring out how to help create a place that's comfortable for people of color to live, whether that's the food that we can access, the, you know, hair products, the teachers that our kids see in their classrooms, the, you know, when they go to class, the resources that are brought to schools, any of those things, right? They make us feel like we belong here. And so what can Lane County do? We can work with our partners to help think about what that looks like. I don't know what that looks like, but I know that we have a lot of smart people in these agencies and we can figure it out. But we have to be willing to talk about it. I think that we will know that we got it right because we stopped losing folks. You know, I know that we've all heard of the exit files that, and some of them have worked on and, you know, continues to work on, but it's you know, there is a pattern of really amazing, kind, smart, qualified people of color coming to fill these professional roles and then leaving after just a handful of years because either it didn't, you know, the place that they were working wasn't supportive, the neighborhood they lived in called the police on them, like, you know, many different experiences, but really all with the same end. So we will know that we got it right because we stopped losing folks. And I'm not going to answer the how should we define success because I actually really believe that that needs to come from the community and not us. So I don't know if that's what you were looking for, but.
Yeah, no, that's good. What about Ms. Holmes or Ms. Williams?
I was trying to share my camera and I shared something else. Sorry. If you want to go, Alana, go ahead.
Yeah, I probably should try to be productive like Mo was by looking at the questions. I think more I'll just say a little bit about me and my history is I've lived in this community now for quite a long time. But I'm from Austin, Texas, and I come from, you know, deep family roots there on my mother's side of the family particularly. And I was very fortunate, I believe, to grow up, and I'm a military brat. So there was a lot of adjustments coming out of growing up in that environment where literally every place we lived was a microcosm of you know, global connections, because there were people, you know, that were married to others from around the world, and we all lived in these shared spaces and learned a lot from each other. I can say just moving from a city like Austin to Eugene was, it's definitely different as you would imagine and expect, in size and scope and complexity, in color, specifically for me, brown color, indigenous, Mexican, and many others. And it can be isolating. It certainly was more of an adjustment when I first moved here. And I think some of what Mo talked about, I mean, there's similarities. We all have our own experiences around it, but simple things that I think a lot we take for granted, you know, food, music, just a vibrancy of hearing and seeing people that look like you. And that's just not something that, you know, that you can experience, that I have been able to experience as much living here. But I am also, obviously I've stayed in this community and there's a lot that I value here. So I agree with Mo. I think that last question is, I'm really excited about the listening sessions that we have to hear from community on the variety of topics that we have, not just, you know, from the first session, but through the next several sessions that we have. And I think some of the actionable things that we could do are things that we are doing now. And I'm really appreciative of not only being a member of this community, but fortunate enough to be a member of this organization that is really taking a deep dive into looking at racial equity and trying to create a framework for us to really assess our work and how we go about our work so that we can develop anti-racist policies and procedures. And I think from there, many other things will flow. I'm going to stop there, and but I appreciate Commissioner Sorensen your question to us. And Judy, I imagine it's your turn.
Sure, and I'll try to be brief, but I think just being asked the question, you know, I think it's hard to try and put yourself in somebody else's shoes until you really hear stories, you hear thoughts, you hear what, you know, what phrases might bother certain people. I think, you know, my background, my mother's Mexican and my family, I grew up in Southern California around a lot of diversity, a lot of family, and kind of at a younger age, we moved to Oregon, rural Oregon. And so it was a little bit of a shock, but just, you know, minor comments that, not minor, but just, you know, from that perspective of being a Mexican American, just hearing thoughts about, you know, illegal aliens at the time, and just little things that kind of make you, you know, it's a deep down kind of feeling that really pushes one to kind of take a look in better perspective of what are people meaning, what are they hearing, where does that come from, and really just try to listen to others. And so for me, doing a lot of this racial equity work has been fascinating, just reading up from a lot of authors, you know, just hearing the stories, hearing things that people have gone through and why, you know, understanding the why and why they're feeling the way they're feeling and why they're oppressed, and, you know, what can we do to better shape our future is really what I'm very excited about, the work here and doing what we can to help this community be a better community so that others want to come here, others want to stay here, and that we have that compassion and that empathy that we sometimes miss just based on not understanding another person. So I didn't really answer the questions, but just wanted to give you a quick perspective on that.
Well, I appreciate you guys and all of you, whether guys or not. I appreciate you sharing these stories. I think that Chair Buck mentioned that she wanted to be an ally. And when I first heard that term, I thought, well, wait a minute, I'm not an ally. I'm with you totally. I'm just not just an ally. But I think the reality is that that's what I aspire to be. I aspire to be an ally and someone that is compassionate and supportive of the diversity of our country and making sure that everybody gets a fair shake. And I think that's really what it comes down to is, are we going to be the kind of government, a kind of organization, the kind of community that gives people a fair shake? And I really appreciate all of you taking the time and especially the risk in addressing this in whatever way you did. So thank you so much.
Commissioner Bosevich.
Thank you. And I just want to go back and clarify something so people don't misunderstand. My lack of acceptance of the false construct of separate races beyond human is an ideal to aspire to. In the colorblind society where people are just judged as individuals and the content of their character is a aspirational goal. At this, I understand we are not there yet. Everyone else is not there with me. And therefore I do understand that people do have these stories and that I haven't experienced them as a person of color with such an easily identifiable difference that people can then try and prejudicially assign a group identity to somebody, which I think is one of the worst things we can do to people, is assign an identity by group membership, because groups are so diverse, and it's such an incorrect, false thing to do. But I do want to recognize that I fully understand that. I grew up in a community that was much more diverse than Oregon, and had a friend in 5th grade that was Muslim from Pakistan that ended up taking our 5th grade class to his to see his culture. And there's things I got exposed to because I grew up in a community that, like the military community, the diplomatic community around Washington, D.C. is extremely diverse. And the city of Washington, D.C. has a lot of diversity naturally around it, with all the government and military employees. So my experiences are vastly different, but I do, from those experiences and the friendships, rather than mentors, I would count the number of friends I have of color over the years, have heard their stories and have heard how they've been impacted by just over classification as a member of a group and the prejudice that comes with that, whether it's being followed in a store to, at my wedding, the people that wouldn't walk down the aisle with 2 of my ushers that were people of color. I appreciate that. And I kind of wish we did have more people to listen to from the public about this. I'm most interested in getting to those aspirational goals that I have, where we don't identify anything other than as human race.
Any other comments? Okay. I don't see or hear any. Thank you all again. Alana, are you raising your hand for a comment?
I'd like to, if I could, make a comment on that. There were other questions that came in after we closed that portion, and I would just like for the audience to know that we do have these questions and comments on record, and to assure you that even though not all the comments were shared, our team will be looking at those and taking those into account and sharing them in the work that we do going forward. Thank you, Chair.
Appreciate that. All right, well, with that information, we will adjourn. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Good night.